2019. Roughly 5 deputies stormed into the home of Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker, falsely accusing them of dealing drugs. Deputy Hunter Elward then proceeded to unholster his gun and shove it into the mouth of Mr. Jenkins. He then inexplicably pulled the trigger, seriously wounding him. This all occurred after they were both forced to strip naked and were abused with sex toys. I'm serious. But believe it or not, it actually gets worse. That's because the sheriff in charge of the so-called goon squad expressed disbelief that this type of abuse behavior was happening at all. Rankin County Sheriff Brian Bailey said, and I'm quoting, "Never in my life did I think this would happen in this department." Never. In a department that has less than 50 employees, you had no idea. Turns out that this particular sheriff must have been managing a different department, because an investigation by the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting, along with the New York Times, found allegations of similar brutality going back to 2004. That's right. For almost 20 years, the Goon Squad had been terrorizing the community while committing crimes, all in the name of law and order. Allegations that the so-called law enforcement community apparently knew nothing about. And I say apparently, because this excuse that the people who are charged with administering justice simply did not know about a large unit of cops regularly committing crimes strains not just credulity, but logic itself. And you know what? That's also because it's so familiar. I've heard this line almost every time a scandal like this comes to light. And what I think this excuse reveals comes straight from the How to Use Law Enforcement to Sow Chaos in Communities playbook. A few pages from the operating manual they use to keep the engine humming for the American law enforcement mayhem machine. So let me try to explain why this is an outright lie and is more than just camouflaging the truth, and share what it says about the actual imperative that drives these units to commit crimes with often unfettered impunity. First, we have to understand one aspect of the structure of law enforcement that often goes unexamined. A police department is essentially a military organization operating technically at the behest of a civilian hierarchy. That is, all police departments are structured around the command and control of a military-style hierarchy with oversight by civilians. That's why officers are often designated for military ranks like sergeant, lieutenant, captain, etc. And that's why civilian control of the police is considered such an important element of reform. It's also how police departments are managed by ranking officers who give orders which the rank and file are expected to obey, no questions asked. This means that regardless of circumstance, those same rank and file officers are acting under the orders of supervisors, regardless of what the top brass says when things go awry. So all of this begs the question, why would a top-down command structure be unaware of the actions of officers who are subject to direct orders? Why would an organization allegedly under the auspices of military-style management be able to run amok without anyone knowing? Well, aside from the fact that often the people in charge are simply lying, I think there's another factor that makes the continued drumbeat of specialized unit in scandal after scandal emerge from the apparent shroud of mystery that surrounds law enforcement leadership. It's a factor that's routinely underestimated, with the mainstream media and political elites hand-wring over how could this have happened. Fairy tale they tell themselves, not us, when the news breaks about a veritable torture unit masquerading as police. Put simply, this unit targeted impoverished areas. Just like Sergeant Newberg, just like the notorious Gun Trace Task Force that robbed residents and dealt drugs in Baltimore, just like most of these cases, they all occur in places struggling or suffering from poverty. Whether it be the big city cases I just mentioned or the rural communities subject to the Goon Squad, bad policing is focused primarily on poor and working class neighborhoods. This is as true for Mississippi as it is for Baltimore, meaning when it comes to unleashing the power of bad policing, the worst of it tends to trickle down. Now, that's perhaps not such a surprising revelation. I mean, the idea that our political elites would seek to unjustly punish the working class is hardly breaking news. What's perhaps less understood is why. And that's what I'm going to break down for you here. And I'm going to do so by making a point about something that may seem tangential, but is actually part of the reasons cops like to cause chaos in communities that can least afford it. The topic is Social Security. You know, the trust that is supposed to, in part, fund retirement for working people that is apparently on a path to run out of money. The meager benefit for people who work their whole lives that apparently overpromises to workers and needs to be curtailed or otherwise altered to ensure that it has enough money to cover the benefits that were earned by hard, backbreaking work. Well, guess what? One big reason Social Security is underwater is due to this: generous benefits to the rich. That's right. Unlike other countries like the United Kingdom and the rest of Europe, which limit what the top earners can take from the system to keep it sustainable, the US grants benefits that in some cases exceed $117,000 per year for the highest earning couples. That's 3 times what the same couple will receive in Britain. The contrast is so extreme that the Cato Institute, that's right, the Cato Institute, which incidentally is no bastion of liberalism, called our Social Security system a golden parachute for the rich. The point they make in the report is that the richest Americans, just like their counterparts in the UK, don't need the extra money, which is why the cap exists in England. The point of this pension system, and supposedly ours, is to make sure every American who retires does not become impoverished. But our system actually does the opposite. It enriches the already rich. And before you start saying, oh, Taya, the rich pay more, so they deserve more, just stop. It's not true. That's because our Social Security system has a cap, meaning you only pay into Social Security tax on a maximum of $168,000 in annual earnings. So a person who earns $50,000 a year pays multiple times more on Social Security tax on a person who makes $500,000 a year. Let me say this another way. The richer you are, the less you put in the system. Every dollar you make over $170,000 a year is not taxed. This also means that if the cap were lifted and everyone was taxed at the same rate, rich or poor, the entire system would not just be solvent, but might even be overfunded. But the reason I bring this up in a rant about law enforcement is simple. The elites are ripping us off and they don't want us to know. They're literally burdening us to pay welfare for the rich, and they don't want us to focus on just how bad a deal it is. Instead, they want us to focus on crime, how bad it is, how out of control it is, how many new punitive laws we need, how we need to pay cops more and spend more money on law enforcement. It's kind of a nice, compact misdirection play. Don't look over here while we're writing bills that tax you more than the filthy rich so they can retire in luxury while you go broke buying insulin or trying to afford an EpiPen. Don't stop fixating on that crime, because if you do, you might realize we're being fleeced and call for change and more fairness in this system. Now, we wouldn't want that, would we? The point is, the powers that be want to keep us confused, off balance, and fighting for our rights instead of demanding more. They want us to be pleading for mercy from the militarized units that terrorize our communities rather than saying, wait a second, you want me to pay more taxes than a millionaire? I mean, I find it hard to believe they just didn't know that deputy sheriffs were breaking the law on a daily basis. I think it was purposeful, willful ignorance, because that was the point, to have our rights degraded and to make our minds pliable and worn down, and ultimately make us psychologically unable to demand better. In sum, they simply want to imprison our minds. That's why videos like the ones you just watched need to be revealed. That's what the so-called scandal in Mississippi pretends, that our ability to imagine something better is imperiled. That's why we need to fight back for it, because freedom, our freedoms, started with a thought, an idea, and we need our minds clear and our imaginations free to define these freedoms. We, the people, need to be the ones to define it, not a bunch of rogue cops.